Welcome to today's webinar, License to Work, States Offering Professional Licenses to Immigrants, brought to you by NCSL. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Ann Morse. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Angie, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Morse, and I am the Program Director for the National Conference of State Legislatures Immigrant Policy Project and the Task Force on Immigration in the States. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, License to Work, States Offering Professional Licenses to Immigrants. NCSL gratefully acknowledges the Pew Charitable Trust for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to point out resources available for download at any time during this webinar. Simply click on the Media Library icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, which looks like a yellow piece of paper with a blue bar graph in front of it. And we may add presentations to it later, so check back once we have the webcast up and live and archived. We value your feedback. After the webinar concludes, please fill out your survey and send it back to us. Let us know it was valuable and how we can do better. We will hold a question and answer session following the presentations. For those joining us via the web, please feel free to use the chat box in the lower left part of your screen to submit any questions ahead of time. Now, please welcome today's guests, and they will be speaking in this order. Senator Rene Garcia from Florida, Senator Matt Hanson. Hi. Senator Matt Hanson from Nebraska. Hello. Erica Contreras from California, and Karen Kaliki from Michigan. Unfortunately, we do not have video, but they will be with us on audio. After I'm done with my introductions, I will be turning off my camera so participants can more easily see the speakers. Senator Rene Garcia was born and raised in the city of Hialeah to working-class Cuban-American parents. In 1997, at the age of 24, Rene Garcia was elected to a 2-year term on the Hialeah City Council. He served in the Florida House of Representatives from 2000 to 2008, was elected to the State Senate in 2010. Senator Garcia serves on NCSL's Task Force on Immigration in the States, chairs the Florida Hispanic Caucus, and is currently the chairman of the Healthcare Regulation Committee. Senator Matt Hanson serves in the Nebraska Legislature, representing District 26 in Northeast Lincoln. He was elected in November of 2014 and serves on the legislature's General Affairs, Urban Affairs, and Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committees, and is chair of the Enrollment and Review. A Lincoln native, he is a graduate of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the University of Nebraska College of Law. Outside of the legislature, he works for the Center for People in Need, a local nonprofit agency. Erica Contreras is a seasoned public policy expert with more than a decade of experience working as a leader in legislative offices and political campaigns. She serves as Chief of Staff to California State Senator Ricardo Lara, Chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and past Chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus. During her service, California has enacted several groundbreaking pieces of legislation, including the nation's first ever loan program for undocumented students, a bill to expand professional licenses for undocumented Californians, and legislation to allow all Californians to obtain driver's licenses. Karen Kaliki is the Deputy Director of the Michigan Office for New Americans. She has been working in immigration law for more than 20 years. She began her work in immigration law by serving as the Immigration and State Department Specialist for U.S. Senator Don Regal. She now serves as Board Chair for Global Detroit, Chairperson of the Global Michigan Initiative, Steering Committee member for the WE Welcoming Economies Global Network, and also serves on the advisory boards for Global Talent Retention Initiative, Welcome at Detroit, and Welcoming Michigan. Now for our questions. Please tell us, from each of your states, why your state chose to take up the issue of professional licensing for immigrants, and what exactly does your law or executive order do? Please, Senator Garcia, take the floor, and I will be turning off my camera.
Thank you, Ann, and it really is a pleasure to be here, and welcome to everyone. And I think these issues are very important for us to have discussions, figure out what we're doing in our respective states. And basically what happened in Florida 2 years ago, really it had to do with the law licenses, so allowing individuals to apply for their bar license, actually. That's what it was. The Supreme Court, there was a student that we all know that usually why things happen in our states are because of an issue that comes up. We tend not to be proactive, we tend to be reactive. And what happened in Florida is that a gentleman by the name of Jose, he applied, he went through public school system, he came to this country at the age of 9. He, by no choice of his own, went to the public school system, then went to Florida State University where he earned his JD. And he sat for the bar, passed his bar. But when he tried to get licensure in the state of Florida, the Supreme Court ruled that he could not apply for the licensure based on a federal law, that the only way we can allow him into the licensure or into the bar was for Florida to get an exemption to that law so he can practice law in the state of Florida. So basically, it happened because one individual got caught up in the system, and so that's how we proceeded to amend the law here in the state of Florida. And we went ahead and passed the House and passed the Senate, where we created an exemption to that federal law in order for Jose to be able to apply for his licensure. And now he's practicing law in the state of Florida, has his license, and there's been a handful of other immigrant students or professionals now that have been able to take advantage of this law and are now currently practicing law. And what the law does, the law stated a couple of issues. It said that a student or anyone applying for this law license has to have been brought to the U.S. as a minor, has to have been present in the U.S. for 10 years, has to have received a document of employment authorization or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, has to have been issued a Social Security number, and there was a couple of other requirements. I think one was the other one that they had to register for the civil service in the state of for the country. So that's what happened in Florida, and that's how we were able to pass this law and have this gentleman practice law. That's what we have before us. And with that, Senator Hanson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and let me again also share thanks for MCSL for putting this together and for inviting us to be here today. In Nebraska, kind of giving a history of where we've come from. We started off in 2009, before I was in the legislature, having a law that defined public benefits and restricting them to those with lawful presence. And in our definition of public benefits, we specifically included professional and commercial licenses, among a host of other things. So that's where we had come from as a starting point. So this most recent session, we had provided a more explicit definition of the lawful status to make sure it was crystal clear to include groups including DACA youth. We specifically used a reference to the Federal Real ID Act and some of their standards for proving lawful status. This was kind of on the minds of a lot of Nebraskans because of something we did last year, where we were also had a bill in the legislature to allow DACA recipients primarily to receive driver's licenses. We at that time were the last state in the nation to allow that, and that was, I would describe this more recent bill of professional licenses as an outgrowth of that. Was we were hearing stories last year about Nebraska high school graduates going to Nebraska colleges who couldn't legally drive despite having lived virtually all of their life in Nebraska. And from getting to know more of those individuals in those stories, we then began to realize that there were people who, I think similar to the Florida example, that we had a gentleman who was an honor student who was a accounting major who wasn't even allowed to sit for the CPA exam because the CPA board knew that he would not be eligible, and he spoke very eloquently at that hearing. And so we were ultimately able to get this bill passed. Pretty broad partisan support, although definitely with some opposition, and we faced and overrode a gubernatorial veto. So that's what we had done in Nebraska, and I believe I'm due to pass it over to Erica Contreras now.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to share what is happening here in California. I work for Senator Ricardo Lara. I'm his chief of staff and his top advisor on immigration issues. And I've had the opportunity to work very closely on professional licenses, specifically for those people who have no Social Security number, who don't have authorization to be here in this country. Similar to the situation that Senator Rene Garcia described in California in 2013, we had a case before the California Supreme Court where the case of Sergio Garcia, a student who did not have lawful status here in this country, passed, went to law school and had passed his exams, and the only barrier to actually receiving his license was being able to have a law and statute that would give him explicit authority. And so we created, similar to what happened in Florida, we created that law, but it was very, very narrow, and it only applied to students trying to obtain a licensure from the bar. And so what we did is the following year, in 2014, Senator Lara, along with his colleagues within the California Legislative Latino Caucus, wanted to explore the opportunity of broadening that law. So we did some research, and we found that in California there was no prohibition. California had not prohibited any person, regardless of status, from actually obtaining a license, but the barrier to having a license, a professional license, was actually the Social Security number, not to demonstrate status, immigration status, but really it was a more practical reason. In our books in California, the use of the Social Security number was used to demonstrate for an applicant for a professional license to demonstrate that they were up to speed on they had paid their taxes, and that they had paid child support, and how when you apply for a license, how you are able to get that verified is through your Social Security number. So we began to explore with the Department of Consumer Affairs, who has under their jurisdiction 40 boards and commissions, licensing boards and commissions. We began to explore, could they use a different number outside of a Social Security number to verify that the applicant is compliant with having paid their taxes and having paid any outstanding child support. And so we came up with the idea of, through our work with advocacy organizations, NILC, and other advocacy organizations, that the use of the federal tax identification number could be just as good as a Social Security number to verify compliance with child support orders and with tax compliance. And so for us in California, our legislature felt that removing that barrier could actually help prepare people, especially a lot of the young people that we, here in California, that we are working to integrate. So in California, we've, over a decade ago, the legislature passed a law to allow in-state tuition, and then later allowed a law to provide grants and then loans to undocumented children. And so we felt like you have this huge investment in young people who grew up here in California. The next natural step would be to allow them to actually obtain a professional license within their field of study, so that at one point, these young people could, with the change of status, could officially practice their trade, and California could benefit from having a ready workforce when we pass comprehensive immigration reform. And so that's what we did in California, and I will pass the mic now to Karen.
Thanks, Erica, and thank you to NCSL for putting on the webinar today. The Michigan Office for New Americans was created by executive order by Governor Snyder about 2.5 years ago to support immigration efforts for the state. And our mission is to help grow Michigan's economy by attracting and retaining global talent, promoting the skills, energy, and entrepreneurial spirit of our immigrant communities, and also create a more welcoming environment within the state. And among other things, MONA, the Michigan Office for New Americans, we support immigration initiatives for the state. We also coordinate with state agencies that provide services to immigrants to look for barriers or perceived barriers, and we try and minimize or eliminate those barriers while maintaining the integrity of a process or a program. And one such barrier that we looked at early on was occupational licensing and credentialing processes in the state. So MONA is housed in the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, or LARA, and they've also been our closest agency partner. LARA initially partnered with Upwardly Global, a national nonprofit that works with skilled immigrants, a little over 2.5 years ago, right around the time our office was created, to help create our first 11 skilled immigrant licensing guides. And what these guides do is they take our state professional licensing process and they provide step-by-step instructions for individuals who are foreign educated or foreign trained, and explains how they get licensed in the state of Michigan. And then since the inception of MONA, the licensing guides have expanded to include 44 different occupations, everything from accountant and engineer to barber and cosmetologist. And because there are so many different departments within the state that handle specific licensing, we also created one phone number for immigrants to call with questions about the licensing process. So obviously none of that has been legislative. That's all been done in-house within department, the LARA department. MONA also partners really closely with our ethnic chambers, our ethnic business organizations, and our 3 state commissions. And that group forms our ethnic cabinet, who we meet with on a quarterly basis. And just about 2 years ago right now, our Chaldean community identified an issue with Iraqi barbers that were having trouble getting licensed in the state. Specifically, those barbers from Iraq were having, they weren't able to provide evidence of their education and training from their home country, mainly because of the conflict within that country. Those documents just were not available for them. So LARA and MONA worked with the state legislature to pass what we're called the Barber Bill, which allows for the LARA licensing board to deem an individual applying for a barber's license and who is foreign educated and foreign trained to be coming from a country of conflict. And this allows those individuals to provide alternative forms of evidence of their qualifications. And the Barber Bill then also allows those individuals to reduce the number of hours needed to apply for licensure. This is just one example of that legislation that was passed to either minimize or eliminate barriers, which again is kind of the goal of our office, one of the goals. And we continue to work in this area. The hope is to take that premise and potentially apply it to the General Occupational Code, so that the LARA Licensing Board has a broader ability to deem individuals as coming from countries of conflict, again, while maintaining the integrity of the licensing process, but also allowing for some additional or optional secondary types of evidence to be provided for education and experience. And then additionally, the Skilled Immigrant Licensing Guide work that Michigan does goes hand in hand with our Michigan International Talent Solutions program, which works with skilled immigrants who are either unemployed or underemployed and helps get them into jobs that better fit their skill set. Typical example is a physician driving a taxi cab. So our MITS program partners with Upwardly Global and Michigan employers to help place those skilled immigrants. And again, that licensing guide work that we do within the state goes hand in hand with that Skilled Immigrant Workforce Development program. And with that, I will turn it back to Ann Morse.
Thank you, Karen. There we go. It worked. Operator, could you also minimize us and let us see the chat box at this time to see if the questions are in? Now, thanks. For this next round of discussion, would you each tell us if there were any concerns raised about legislation in your state? If so, how they're resolved? And finally, what benefits and outcomes do you anticipate? And I'll turn it to Senator Garcia.
Yes, thank you, Ann. Again, I guess the biggest concern that there was when we passed that legislation, allowing the gentleman to get his license, was that this was a slippery slope, and usually that's the case when we have these type of issues that come, these immigration issues that come before any legislature. Everyone thinks it's going to be, you're going to open up the floodgates and all these illegal immigrants are not going to start applying for licenses. And that's not necessarily that's not the case. These are individuals who are trained, have the background and training, and just because of barriers to enter the field that most of these associations and groups put up, because they're trying to limit the amount of individuals that are actually practicing in their fields, they limit who can get these licenses. And it really turned into a big heated debate on immigration. When truth be told, at least the way that we looked at it in the Senate and both in the House, some members of the House, it really was about fairness and justice to individuals. Again, especially these young individuals who were brought to this country by no choice of their own, went through the public school system, went through a university system that we funded. We paid for all of their education, and then when they get to that point of licensure, we're saying no, because of an archaic law that exists in the book. I mean, if that was the case, then we might as well just not fund their education while they're here, and just let them go on to the sunset. But if we want to make sure that these individuals contribute to society, because the argument that's always being made is, they're a drain on society. They're using our tax dollars for the health care and education, and they're not contributing anything back because they're here illegal. Well, if they go through the system and we are paying for their education, what better way for them to give back than them to be able to practice in their respective fields? And what's happening now, and folks, is in the state of Florida, we're having a debate both in the upcoming legislative session, both for the motor vehicle licenses. That is an issue that keeps on coming up every year to ensure that individuals who are here illegally at least are not driving on the road illegally, because we know they're going to be driving. So that's going to be a debate that we want to make sure we move that conversation forward. And what's happening here in the state of Florida is these individuals are driving illegally because they don't have a driver's license, and then when they get into accidents, they don't have insurance. So at the end of the day, the ones that pay the consequences for their lack of driver's license are us, the ones, those that have driver's licenses that have insurance, and that's why a lot of the premium rates here in South Florida, especially in Miami-Dade County and Broward, have gone up. And the battle that always we have in the state of Florida as it relates to licensure is always with the boards. Especially with the Florida Board of the FDA, the Florida Dental Association. Here, they have always been roadblocks in place, not wanting these dentists, foreign-trained dentists, to sit for their exams. And their argument is always, well, the training that they receive in their countries is subpar to what we receive here. My argument has always been, well, if it's subpar and they're passing our own exam, then maybe our exam is subpar. So if you want to change the standards, don't deny these individuals who you can verify that they did go to school, they have the background and training and education in their respective countries, and the schools that are going to are validated and verified by the Department of Education as valid and accredited schools. Why not allow them to sit for these exams? So if you do have a problem with these individuals sitting for our exams, then coming from a validated or certified school outside of the country, then raise the standards of the exam. And that's the argument that I always pose. If they're passing the exams, that means that they're meeting the standards and quality standards that you and us in the state are implementing. If you have a problem with that, then raise the standards. And I think that's the argument that we're going to be hearing here in Florida, and I think it's going to happen across other states. And I think for those of us that are interested in proposing legislation, just be ready for that argument, because that argument has been coming up for years and years and years, at least to my ears and to the ears of the legislature. And again, we're going to hear that again this year. We're going to present a bill having to do with the Medical Association, the FMA, and the foreign-trained doctors, at least to give them the ability to either get a refresher course so they can go ahead and sit for their Florida Medical Association or the Florida medical license in order so they can practice. And one of the stipulations has always been, try to put them at least at the beginning, the first two years or 3 years, have them work in underserved areas in order to fulfill the requirements of part of the legislation and have them get their medical license. So those are some of the challenges that we've had and the issues that we've had, and now I'll pass it over to Senator Hanson from Nebraska to see if he can tell us what some of his challenges have been.
Great, thank you. When you first started off, I was kind of nodding along some of the arguments that you seem to face were similar here. A lot of the slippery slope that if we allow these licenses, all of a sudden, everybody's going to be flocking to Nebraska, everybody's going to be coming here, and that framed in frankly, a negative context. When actually Nebraska, we were supporters of the bill, we were able to kind of counter that in a lot of the ways. That's we have one of the, at the moment, lowest unemployment rates in the nation, and actually have in some areas, especially like our rural areas, drastic shortages in some professions, especially, say, out in our western rural portion, drastic shortages in a lot of healthcare providers. So that was one way we were attempting to kind of pick an attraction and submit it to the positive. Other concerns were kind of, I would say, the term rule of law came up significantly, and whatnot. We are respecting the rule of law by allowing Nebraskans to apply for and get professional licenses, provided they met all the other requirements, with lawful here. That was something, frankly, to some extent, this bill, our bill this year, 947, also became kind of a springboard for a larger immigration policy debate that obviously needs to be settled at a level that's not Nebraska. So those are some of the critiques we've had. One of the things we see it as a positive, again, kind of in a similar vein, is really the return on investment. Is if somebody's lived here for the vast majority of their lives, gone to Nebraska high school, and gone to a Nebraska college, we've educated and we've trained them, and all of a sudden we're going to say, no, you can't work here, you should move to Iowa. We should be getting banking notes from Iowa, or whatever neighboring state that could get licensed in. So that's my summary, and I'll pass it on to Erica again.
Thank you. In California, we did not have significant pushback, in fact, from boards or bureaus under the Department of Consumer Affairs. I think the only pushback we had, pushback about expanding the law, and specifically the federal tax identification number. They wanted to make sure to continue to be able to check as required for compliance on taxes and child support, and didn't really weigh in on the policy of whether or not it was appropriate or whether it was a good policy call that the legislature was making regarding expanding access to people regardless of status in California. I think their concern was that we needed to make the law more explicit. Initially, when we drafted the law, we basically just made a very minor change. We said anywhere that it said that in order for you to apply for one of the 40 boards or bureaus within the department, that you had to provide a Social Security number, we added or a tax identification number in lieu of. They felt that that's not sufficient. If our intent was to expand the law and broaden it to provide access to anyone regardless of status in our state, then we needed to be able to demonstrate that we were utilizing the authority under federal law, which denies undocumented populations the opportunity for a license in California unless the state specifically spells out that benefit and makes these people eligible for that benefit. And so what we did is we spelled it out for the departments. The boards and bureaus did not want to be sued if they were implementing a state law that could be a violation of federal law. And so we clarified very clearly in the statute what we meant, and we made clear so that they were comfortable with the implementation of the law. With that, we were within the legislature, the conversation, there were certainly people that were concerned, members of the legislature in both houses that were concerned about, individuals who don't have legal status in California or the United States have access to what they believe were a benefit. But where we, I think, were able to put a dent in the concern was that you have to, in order for an applicant to be able to apply for a license, they have to have a federal tax identification number. In order to obtain a federal tax identification number, you have to pay your taxes. And so anybody who's applying has by default paid their taxes compliant with the IRS. And so the argument that these people, these individuals without status could potentially be accessing a benefit that they haven't earned, I think we deflated that argument a little bit. I think the biggest concern for our legislators, specifically the Democrats in California, was the concern about anytime we're expanding the law to a population that is, described as living in the shadows, the concern is that we're creating imperfect laws that potentially put this population at jeopardy for deportation. And in California, I think our legislature, in a bipartisan fashion in some cases, has worked to integrate immigrants even those that are undocumented. And so we wanted to be very careful about how we were crafting the law to make sure that we weren't creating unintended consequences for this population that could potentially then be put at risk for deportation. And so that was among the concerns that came up, but I think we worked through with the support of the bureaus and the boards, the Department of Consumer Affairs, the governor's office, and we're able to get this bill signed, and now is in effect as of January of this year. And we have significant take-up of applicants that have used the tax identification number. To date, I am told by the department that we have 1,638 applicants that have used the tax identification number to apply for a license to date. And with that, I'll pass it over to Karen from Michigan.
Thanks, Erica. As I mentioned, we really only had the one piece of legislation that has kind of come out of the licensing and credentialing work we've done, and there was not really any concerns raised for that. And I think the majority of that reason is because of the integrity of the original licensing process was maintained, and those barbers who do come from countries of conflict still have to complete a certain requisite number of training hours in the state of Michigan to actually get licensed. So it's not as if they can go through the entire process without having to go through any type of credentialing here in the state. Our overall work with licensing and credentialing, as I mentioned, has not required legislation at all. It's been mainly accomplished within our Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Department. And the biggest benefits that we see to the skilled immigrants is that they can obviously clearly understand what the occupational licensing process is, and they're able to receive assistance if needed. In 2015, we had over 20,000 website hits on our various licensing guides, and in the first quarter of 2016, we know that the most visited licensing sites were nursing, pharmacists, and social workers. So, it's interesting for us to see. We can kind of see from some of the hits and some of the information we get from some of our stakeholder partners, which professional licensing processes are being most utilized by our foreign-born communities. And with that, I will turn it back to Anne for Q&A.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for all the excellent presentations, and now let's open up to the audience for questions. I'm going to ask Roberto Mendoza on NCSL staff to manage that. If you have more questions, please use the chat box in the lower left part of the screen to submit any questions.
Great. Our first question is from Oregon, and it is, what is the role of higher ed? What role has higher ed played in passing these laws? There's the universities and professional schools participate in the work leading up to the legislation and advocacy and getting it passed. And for the fast-track licensure in Michigan, this is for you, Karen, are the community colleges and universities helping to come up with proficiency assessments to help get immigrants onto a fast track? And you all are free to chime in.
So this is Karen, so I'll just start with the Michigan-specific portion. So it's not necessarily a fast-track license. They still have to go through the same process that anyone else would. It's just because, and again, the current legislation that we have is specifically for barbers. It's obviously very niche, and we understand that. But if anyone's aware of the Michigan landscape, we have the largest concentration of Arab Americans here, and so that, in terms, and especially individuals from Iraq. So that was a special need that was identified to our office as being a barrier for those barbers to get licensed. So obviously right now we've just got that very small niche. With that said, there isn't, for that particular process, a need for community colleges or universities to help with any type of assessment. However, we've also in Michigan been looking very closely at the physician licensing process. We have a number of foreign-educated, foreign-trained physicians who are unable to get licensed in the state. And it's not just the state licensing process, it's everything that goes in with that. It's, malpractice insurance, it's board certifications, it's healthcare, it's, the insurance. There's a whole host of different pieces that go into the licensure of any physician. So what we are trying to look at, though, are other potential medical fields that we could utilize foreign-educated and foreign-trained physicians. So when it comes to that process that we're looking at, more than likely we will try and invite certain universities that has specific healthcare programs to try and help with any assessments that might need to be made for going forward.
Great. Anybody else?
Gilberto, this is Erica. With regards to the involvement of our public universities in advancing some of these policies here in California, I think for us, what might be maybe a slightly unique situation in Michigan or other states is that we have a significantly large population of undocumented individuals who were born in Mexico or in other countries, came here as children, and have grown up in the state. And so they've been part of our public education system from, in some cases from K-12 to higher education. And so they've, while they've not been proactive in trying to create changes in the law, I think they've been very supportive and understanding of the legislature's attempt to ensure that we keep either the investment going forward so that we can get that workforce ready and prepared for our state to be able to continue to compete nationally and globally. There's not been any pushback, certainly, but for us, I think it's not necessarily been an issue of training people who are newcomers to our state. Really, it's been an issue of ensuring that the kids that are within those public institutions are then able to continue with their training, their education, and the next step would be their licensure. So there's been, I think, just overall support, not necessarily working specifically to advance the laws, but just overall support.
I think if I can chime in, what you can use the university and the college system for, and the community colleges, is at least to set up some expedited, not an expedited program, but refresher programs, refresher courses, because if they're going to sit down for these licensure exams, obviously, they're coming from, if they are newly arrived or they've been here for a couple of years, they still are going to need some refresher courses, refresher programs in order to get them as best prepared in order to pass those licensure exams. And here in the state of Florida, most of our licensure exams, you can take them 2, 3, maybe 4 times maximum before you cannot take them again. So it defeats the purpose in passing these laws or opening the doors for individuals to sit down and take these licensure exams if we don't prepare them and get them the proper training or the proper refresher courses so they can be as best prepared to pass those exams. And I think the universities and the colleges we've talked to, especially as it relates to the medical licenses here in the state of Florida, and even with nursing as well, they're all willing and able to help. As a matter of fact, they want to be part at the table, and they want to be able to offer these programs. One, it helps them get exposure across the state, and number 2, it helps them to bring some more revenues into the college and into the college and to their system. So I think it's paramount that we do have a collaboration with the colleges and community college and university systems in order to help prepare these individuals for the licensure exams.
I think that's a good segue to the next question on what the landscape looks like. Sorry, give me a second. What the landscape looks like for funding opportunities and infrastructure support for these programs coming from the state.
I think for Florida, if I can, guys, the funding, a lot of times, as we all know, funding is very limited. And in Florida, what will happen, I think, especially with the legislature, with both the House and the Senate, controlled by Republicans, and I'm a Republican, proud Republican, and I think it's paramount that if these individuals are going to go down this path, and we do make these laws and make it beneficial for them, the resources are limited in the state of Florida, so they would have to find the resources in order to pay for these refresher programs, refresher classes, in order to get their licensure. I think what happens many times here in Florida with some other legislators, even though that when I chair the Health Appropriations Committee, we put a lot of funding in order to help our immigrant population. But what happens with some of our friends, both Republicans and Democrats, it's not just a Republican or Democrat issue, is that they see they believe that this is, the state is already helping them by opening the door. Let them close the door with figuring out where they get the funding. It could be wrong, or right or wrong, however you want to look at it, but that's just the mentality that's in the Florida legislature right now.
This is Karen in Michigan. In terms of the opportunities for those immigrants or refugees looking to be in their professional careers, our Michigan International Talent Solutions program that we launched last fall in cooperation with a national nonprofit, Upwardly Global, that does work with immigrants and refugees who are either unemployed or underemployed and tries to get jobs that better fit their skill set. UpGlow provides an online onboarding process of modules that the immigrants who are here, they're individuals who are permanently work authorized. This program is designated for those individuals. And they go through some online modules, complete their process with UpGlow. They work with Upwardly Global on getting their resume into a quote-unquote, U.S. format looking resume. They do some job coaching for how to do interviewing skills. Those individuals, once they complete that onboarding portion, are transferred to our program director. It's seamless from the job seeker standpoint, but they're transferred to our program director, who does on the ground work with the job seeker here in Michigan, as well as with employers who are looking for talent. And it's almost a talent concierge matching type service, where we take the immigrant talent that we have that are, again, unemployed or underemployed, and we take the employers who are looking for talent and try and do some matching of jobs that way. Right now, in particular, we're looking at engineering professions and business, because that is where the largest need, at least from the talent pool or the employer pool that we have, that's the larger need. So, again, we've got a program that launched last October that's really specifically geared toward skilled immigrant workforce development and getting individuals back into their professional careers. And that's a state.
Status in Nebraska, similarly, I'm sure with all states, funding is tough. So as far as kind of more specific, I think the question is originally tailored to specific career counseling for immigrant populations. There's not a specific funding structure to what I know. I certainly would expect and do know that the education level, whether it's K-12 or higher ed, certainly have opportunities and new ways of working with those populations, as well as relying on more of a nonprofit network. There's definitely groups we've worked with, including some of the stakeholders we've had on our bills, that do that in their day-to-day.
In California, we have many opportunities for students who are going through the CSU, the Cal State University system, or the University of California system, to be able to get assistance directly from the institution. We do have in California the ability for students that are undocumented who went to school here as children to be able to access the California grant, which is significant aid. For adults going to school for remaining, they are undocumented. I think there are more barriers for them, but if they go through the community college system, certainly there are opportunities for them to be able to get assistance. If they went back to school to our public universities and institutions, they would be able to get assistance. But where the challenge lies, I think, for the population, the adult population who would need training for a specific trade, would be that if that training came from a specific pot, came from the federal government, so it came from the Workforce Investment Fund, or if it came from EDD, who gets significant money from the federal government, the Employment Development Department would probably require a Social Security number for purposes of the individual applicant for this training program is here with legal status. So there are opportunities for assistance and help, but it really depends on the pot of funding that the training program is how the training program is funded, that would create either opportunity or barrier for access.
Great. Our last question is there research being done to look at in-demand jobs that immigrants could help to fill? Where are you all getting your information of, I know California, you all did a broad base of licenses, but some states are doing targeted specific licenses. Where is that information and infrastructure and support coming from?
So this is Karen. We looked at a number of different sources, or we utilize a number of different sources, and some of it is our own state data analysts. We have obviously our workforce development agency within the state. We also look at national data, organizations such as the Pew Charitable Trust or Partnership for New American Economy. There's a number of different sources, both within the state as well as national, that we look at in terms of job shortages or positions that are in demand.
Any other additional comments?
And I'll just say, we in California, our legislature didn't specifically do research about trying to meet a specific need, but we did, since the law took effect, the top license that has been sought by people using the tax identification number is the barbering and cosmetology license, and we have, since January of 2015, we have 1,179 people who applied. To date, the entire number of applications for these boards and bureaus is 1,638. So it's a significant portion of the licenses to date.
Hearing no more questions, I'm going to move to close today's webinar. I do want to say that we are here to continue serving you. If you have any questions in future, please contact Roberto Mendoza at ncsl.org. His email is on the slide right now, and we will try to continue to ask your questions about licensing. And I would like to thank Senator Garcia, Senator Hanson, Erica Contreras, and Karen Filippi for their excellent presentations and sharing their time with us today, and to the web audience for your time and interest. Thank you so much for joining us. And finally, thank you to the Pew Charitable Trust for sponsoring today's event. This webinar will be recorded and placed online at ncsl.org/webinars in the next week or so. You will also receive an email directing you to a short survey. Please complete this, as we do value your feedback. And again, this concludes one more thought. If you have not yet signed up for NCSL's Legislative Summit in Chicago, please do so. The task force will be meeting on Sunday, August 7th. We look forward to seeing you there. This concludes today's webinar, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.